The tear in reality was not a gentle parting but a violent, screeching rip, a wound across the fabric of existence. Maul, or what remained of him after the ritual's cataclysmic backlash, was hurled through the void like a shattered weapon. His consciousness, a maelstrom of agony and pure, undiluted hatred, clung to existence by a thread. He remembered the blinding light, the agony of transmigration, and then nothing. He landed hard, not on solid ground, but on something soft and yielding, yet still impacting with a jarring thud that sent a jolt of pain through his reformed body. The air was thick, heavy with an unfamiliar energy that prickled his senses like static electricity. He drew a ragged breath, tasting damp soil and the metallic tang of something akin to fear. His eyes snapped open. Above him, a canopy of unfamiliar trees, their leaves a dark, oppressive green, formed a jagged silhouette against a bruised, twilight sky. The world spun, and Maul pushed himself up, his muscles protesting with a dull ache. He was disoriented, his formidable senses overwhelmed by the sheer alienness of his surroundings. Gone was the arid, rocky landscape of his exile, the desolate planets he had scoured for forgotten power. This place was lush, verdant, alive with a strange, vibrant hum that permeated everything. But beneath the surface beauty, Maul's forced senses screamed. A colossal shadow loomed, a cold, hungry darkness that dwarfed any he had encountered since Sidious. It was a malignancy, an apex predator's aura emanating from somewhere nearby. He was no longer the imposing Zabrak, his red and black tattooed skin, crown of horns, and piercing yellow eyes. His body, reformed by the twisted ritual, was now human. Pale skin stretched over taut muscle, dark hair fell across a sharp, angular face, and his eyes, though still burning with an inner fire, were a mundane brown. The illusion, born of desperate necessity and raw force will, held. He reached for his traditional weapons, the twin-bladed lightsaber, the elegant vibroaxe, but his hands met only empty air. His traditional tools were gone, severed from him by the dimensional shift. A feral snarl, more instinct than sound, rumbled in his chest. Power, boundless and raw, coursed through him, but it felt different, unfocused. The subtle currents of the Force here were distorted, intertwined with whatever this world called its own energy. He needed to adapt, and quickly. He moved, a silent rapline through the dense undergrowth, his steps light, economical. He felt like a predator reintroduced to a new hunting ground, assessing its prey, its threats, its hidden paths. He quickly discerned the source of the immense dark power. It was not diffuse, like the shadow of an entire empire. It was concentrated, a single, dominant will, echoing in the Force like a dark star. Lord Voldemort. The name, whispered by the psychic residue of fear in the very air, resonated in his mind. Maul spent hours observing, a shadow among shadows. He saw strange contraptions that moved without visible propulsion, heard guttural, booming voices using incomprehensible sounds, and witnessed acts of casual cruelty that were starkly familiar, yet alien in their execution. He saw figures cloaked in black, faces obscured by masks, raising slender sticks that spat light and fury. Magic, he heard a terrified, fleeing civilian whisper. They were using magic. He witnessed a horrifying display in a desolate, half-abandoned village. A small group of these Death Eaters, as they called themselves, had cornered a family in what appeared to be their home. Their leader, a corpulent man with a cruel sneer beneath his mask, was toying with them. Maul felt the raw fear, the desperation, like a physical blow. He also felt the callous joy radiating from the Death Eaters. They were torturers, sadists, instruments of their dark master's will. They were familiar. And they were weak. No, please. A woman's scream tore through the night, laced with genuine terror. Don't hurt my children. The fat Death Eater merely laughed, a grating, unmusical sound. Crucio, he bellowed, and a jet of red light erupted from his wand. The father, a scrawny man, crumpled, writhing on the ground, his screams tearing at the night. Maul's anger, a constant companion, began to simmer. This was the casual dominion of the strong over the weak, something he understood perfectly. But the inefficiency of it, the childish glee, was galling. They wasted energy, time, and potential. This Voldemort ruled through fear, certainly, but it seemed a blunt instrument, lacking the subtle, pervasive control a true Sith Lord exerted. This was an empire built on terror, but one that lacked true discipline, true vision. It was ripe for taking. He watched for another few minutes, observing their methods, their crude spells. They were slow, often requiring vocalizations, sometimes elaborate gestures. Compared to the instant, silent power of the Force, it felt clumsy, almost primitive. Yet, the intent behind it was clear, and the power undeniable. He felt a spark of curiosity, a cold, calculating interest. He could adapt this. He would adapt this. His presence was completely masked by the Force, his essence cloaked from even the sharpest magical senses. He observed them round up the terrified family, marching them out of their crumbling home. The Death Eaters were clearly on some kind of raid, not merely a random act of terror. Their leader, the corpulent one, was giving orders to a younger, more nervous-looking Death Eater. "Take them to the old mill," the leader commanded, his voice muffled by his mask. "Bellatrix wants a sample for her collection of curiosities. And make sure the girl isn't harmed too badly. She's for our Lord's amusement later." Maul's eyes narrowed. This was an opportunity. Not merely to introduce himself, but to gauge their power, their reactions, and to make a statement that would reverberate through their ranks, straight to their dark master. He needed to be seen as powerful, mysterious, and utterly ruthless. An unknown quantity, too dangerous to ignore, too useful to immediately eliminate. He waited for them to move deeper into the dark, winding path leading towards the old mill, away from any potential witnesses. He let them get complacent, their cruel laughter echoing through the trees. Then he moved. His attack was a blur of calculated violence. He didn't bother with subtle mind tricks. He wanted brute force, visible power. The first Death Eater, a gaunt figure bringing up the rear, felt a sudden, crushing weight on his chest, as if an invisible fist had slammed into him. He gasped, his eyes wide with confusion, and was propelled backward into a thick tree trunk with a sickening crack. His wand clattered to the ground, his body limp. A force push, delivered with precision. The others spun, wands raised, shouting curses, but Maul was already closing the distance. He moved with a speed that defied human perception, a dark phantom among the trees. The corpulent leader barked, "Who goes there? Show yourself." Maul emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of cold fury. "Weakness," he hissed, his voice a low, guttural growl, amplified by the Force to carry across the clearing. "Your master tolerates incompetence." The Death Eaters, momentarily stunned by his sudden appearance and the sheer arrogance of his words, hesitated. This was not a resistance fighter, not an Auror. This was something else. He wore no robes, no mask, just simple, dark clothing. And he radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated menace. "Get him," one of them shrieked, firing a jet of green light, Avada Kedavra. Maul recognized the intent to kill, a blunt, direct assault. He didn't dodge. Instead, he simply pushed. A wave of pure force energy erupted from him, a violent repulse that slammed into the incoming spell. The green light seemed to waver, momentarily dissipating against the invisible shield of his will, before his push continued, striking the caster. The Death Eater was lifted clean off his feet, flung back into a ditch, hitting the ground with a grunt that quickly turned into a gurgle. He wasn't dead, but his wand was broken, and his body was clearly shattered. The others screamed, a mixture of fear and rage. They fired a volley of curses, red, purple, blue lights streaking towards him. Maul allowed a few to glance off his subtle force shield, feeling the strange impact against his energy. Others he deflected with precise, unseen shoves, sending them wide or back towards their casters with terrifying velocity. He was learning. Their magic was a directed energy, intent-based, and he could influence it with the Force. He focused on the remaining three. One he choked, an invisible vice closing around their throat, their hands clawing uselessly at their neck before they collapsed, unconscious but alive. Another he disarmed with a sudden, sharp tug, pulling the wand from their grasp and snapping it in half with a quick, unseen flex of the Force. As the Death Eater stared in shock, Maul delivered a precise blow to the temple, rendering them unconscious. Only the corpulent leader remained, trembling, his wand arm shaking violently. He had seen the others fall, effortlessly, silently, his own magic proving useless against this impossibly fast, impossibly powerful newcomer. He stared at Maul, not seeing a man, but a demon. Maul advanced slowly, his eyes burning with an inner light, his force-based illusion momentarily flickering at the edges as his raw power bled through. A flash of red skin, a hint of sharp teeth, but gone as quickly as it appeared. The leader gasped, stumbling back. "Tell your master," Maul growled, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed the depths of the dark side. "Tell Voldemort that his hunting grounds are no longer his alone. A new shadow has arrived. A stronger one." He delivered a final force push, not to harm, but to propel the leader violently backward, tumbling head over heels until he slammed into a tree, unconscious. Maul then turned to the terrified family. He looked at them for a long moment, his gaze analytical, cold. He had no interest in saving them, but their distress had served its purpose. He vanished into the night as silently as he had arrived, leaving behind a scene of inexplicable devastation and a chilling message for the Dark Lord. The corpulent Death Eater, when he finally awoke, clawed his way through the forest, his mask lost, his face pale and contorted with terror. He would reach Malfoy Manor, shivering, broken. He would stammer out a tale of a creature of impossible speed and power, a being who rendered magic useless, who spoke of Voldemort with contempt. And Lord Voldemort, sensing the true power behind the story, would be intrigued and infuriated. He would demand to know who this new shadow was. Maul had made his introduction. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Grin. The silence that followed the brutal efficiency of Kaelen's attack was thicker than the scent of blood that still clung to the air. Voldemort, pale face illuminated by the faint glow of a dying hearth, regarded Kaelen with an unsettling stillness. His crimson eyes, devoid of human warmth, seemed to bore into Kaelen, dissecting him, searching for weakness or deception. Kaelen met the gaze without flinching, his own features carefully schooled into an expression of stoic deference. He felt Voldemort's mind brush against his own, a probing, insidious presence, but the force shield he had meticulously constructed over years of hiding was an impenetrable wall. It was a crude, brutal mental intrusion compared to the sophisticated telepathy of a powerful Sith, but it was nonetheless a unique form of dark side power. "You are effective, Kaelen," Voldemort finally drawled, his voice a sibilant whisper that nonetheless commanded absolute attention. "Unorthodox in your methods, perhaps, but undeniably efficient. Your talent is considerable." Kaelen simply inclined his head. "I serve, my lord." A faint, almost imperceptible curl touched Voldemort's thin lips, a viper's smile that promised more pain than pleasure. "Indeed. Such loyalty, such zeal, is rare even among my most devoted. You displayed no hesitation, no revulsion. Only purpose." He turned to his inner circle, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Death Eaters. Lucius Malfoy, still pale, avoided his master's eyes. Bellatrix Lestrange, however, seemed invigorated, a manic gleam in her own dark eyes as she regarded Kaelen with an almost predatory admiration. She had understood the sheer, unadulterated pleasure in the act of destruction. "Let this be a lesson," Voldemort continued, his voice rising slightly, echoing with cold menace. "Indecision costs. Weakness invites defeat. Kaelen has shown what true devotion and power can achieve." He paused, his gaze settling back on Kaelen. "You have earned your place in my inner circle, Kaelen. Malfoy will see to your needs. You will be instrumental in the next phase of our ascendancy." The words were a jolt of triumph for Maul. He had bypassed years of blood loyalty and political maneuvering in a single, brutal night. He had proven himself worthy in the only currency Voldemort understood, raw, uncompromising power. As the meeting concluded, the Death Eaters dispersed, leaving Kaelen alone for a moment with a seething Malfoy. Lucius, his pride stung by Voldemort's barely concealed disapproval, sneered. "Do not mistake the Dark Lord's momentary favor for true standing, Kaelen. This world has rules, traditions. Things you clearly know nothing of. Rules exist to be broken, Malfoy," Kaelen replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Traditions are chains for the weak. And as for knowing nothing, I learn quickly." He allowed a faint flicker of the Force to emanate from him, a chilling wave of dark presence that caused Malfoy to instinctively recoil, his elegant features tightening with unease. "See to it that he is accommodated," Voldemort's voice, though distant, was clear. "And Malfoy, ensure his loyalty remains absolute. I will brook no failures." Lucius, pale with suppressed fury, bowed stiffly. "As you command, my lord." Over the next few days, Kaelen became a silent, watchful shadow within Malfoy Manor. He observed. He listened. He learned. The wizarding world, with its peculiar blend of ancient mysticism and casual anachronism, was a labyrinth of new experiences. He watched Death Eaters cast spells, their wands extensions of their will, their incantations sharp commands that bent reality. He saw the flick of a wrist produce a searing jet of green light, the Avada Kedavra. He noted the complex, interwoven hand movements for wards, the careful pouring of potions, the instantaneous disappearance and reappearance of apparition. These were not the intuitive, flowing movements of the Force, but a rigid, formulaic system that required discipline and a deep understanding of arcane theory. In the seclusion of his allocated chambers, Kaelen began his experiments. He held his hand out, mimicking a wand movement he'd observed, focusing his will. Nothing. He tried adding a sound, a guttural growl that was a distant echo of his native Zobric tongue. Still nothing. He closed his eyes, centering himself in the Force. The raw, untamed power coursed through him, a familiar, comforting embrace. He reached out, not to replicate a spell, but to understand the underlying energy. The magic, he realized, wasn't just words and gestures, it was channeled intent. A focused projection of will, often amplified by a wand. He tried again, this time with a different approach. He had seen a Death Eater use Bombarda, a blasting curse. Instead of attempting to incant, he focused his Force push. He willed the air to explode outwards, channeling the raw kinetic energy of the Force, not as a subtle push, but as a violent burst. Crack. A small, decorative vase on the mantelpiece across the room shattered, propelled into the wall with surprising force. Kaelen's lips curved into a predatory smile. It wasn't the exact same effect as the wand-driven Bombarda, lacking the distinct magical punch, but the result was identical. Destruction. It was an adaptation, a bridge between two forms of power. He spent hours, days, perfecting these adaptations. A force pull became an invisible accio, snatching objects from shelves. A subtle force persuasion became a rudimentary imperious, influencing the low-level house elves to bring him obscure books from the manor's library, their eyes glazed with unnatural compliance. Enhanced senses allowed him to detect magical signatures, spells, and even the emotional fluctuations of others, a rudimentary legitimacy without the need for a wand. His innate precognition, usually brief flashes of future violence, sharpened into a sense of impending magical attacks, allowing him to dodge curses with unnerving speed. The challenge wasn't doing magic, but appearing to do magic. His human disguise, maintained by constant force exertion, needed to look like he was using a wand, or at the very least, wandless magic as understood by wizards. He began incorporating subtle hand movements, feigned grunts of effort, to mimic the casting process. It was during one of Voldemort's late-night strategy sessions that Kaelen saw his opportunity to cultivate Silas Thorne. Silas, a nervous, ambitious pureblood with receding hair and perpetually wide eyes, was typically relegated to standing guard or running minor errands. He exuded an eagerness to please, a desperation for recognition that Kaelen recognized as a potent vulnerability. The mudblood infestations in Nottinghamshire are proving, persistent, Voldemort hissed, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Death Eaters. Who amongst you has the stomach to purge these vermin with absolute prejudice? A few Death Eaters shuffled, none eager to volunteer for what was seen as a tedious, low-status task, despite its brutality. Kaelen sensed the collective apathy. "My lord," Silas blurted out, his voice a little too high, stepping forward with trembling eagerness. I could lead the cleanup operation. I know the area." Voldemort merely regarded him with contempt. "Your enthusiasm is noted, Thorn, but your efficacy remains to be proven." Before Silas could stammer a reply, Kaelen stepped forward. "My lord, if I may, I require more understanding of this realm's intricacies. Perhaps Silas Thorn could assist me in this endeavor. His knowledge of the local populace and customs could prove invaluable, even in such menial tasks." He deliberately used the word menial to subtly flatter Voldemort's disdain for such operations, while simultaneously implying Silas's utility to him. Voldemort's crimson eyes flickered between Kaelen and Silas. "You believe Thorn is capable of guiding your learning, Kaelen?" "He appears ambitious, my lord," Kaelen replied smoothly. "Ambition, properly directed, can be a powerful tool." Voldemort allowed another one of his chilling smiles. "Very well. Thorn, you're assigned to Kaelen. Ensure he gains the understanding he seeks. And ensure the Nottinghamshire problem is resolved. I expect no less than total eradication." Silas practically vibrated with gratitude and terror. "Yes, my lord. Absolutely." The Nottinghamshire assignment became Kaelen's primary classroom, with Silas as his unwitting tutor. Kaelen observed Silas's magical prowess, confident but uninspired, and his interaction with the local wizarding population. He learned about the Ministry of Magic's fractured control, the network of informants, the fear that permeated every aspect of daily life. "The Ministry is a joke," Kaelen, Silas confided one evening as they rested in a dilapidated farmhouse after a particularly nasty raid. "Corrupted from the inside out. Half the department heads are Dark Lord loyalists, the other half are too terrified to act. Scrimgeour, that idiot, still believes he's in control." Kaelen grunted, a non-committal sound, but he filed away the information. "And the Dark Lord's reach? Does it extend beyond Britain?" Silas, emboldened by Kaelen's apparent interest and the Dark Lord's unexpected favor, puffed out his chest slightly. "Oh, absolutely. Whispers of alliances with Grindelwald's old followers in mainland Europe. And there are discussions about expanding. The Muggle world, you see. So ripe for the taking, once our master consolidates power here." "Fascinating," Kaelen murmured, his eyes alight with a cold, calculating fire that Silas mistook for shared ambition. He was learning more than just magic. He was learning the socio-political fabric of this new hunting ground. He began subtly influencing Silas. A carefully timed nod of approval, a shared glance of contempt for a cowering Muggleborn, a suggestion that Kaelen would put in a good word for Silas with the Dark Lord. He used his subtle force persuasion, a low hum of suggestion that resonated with Silas's insecurity, amplifying his desire for Kaelen's approval. Silas saw Kaelen as his conduit to power, the key to escaping his mediocrity. "I heard the Dark Lord is searching for something," Silas whispered conspiratorially one night, his voice hushed. "Ancient magic. Something that makes him untouchable. My aunt, she works in the Department of Mysteries, before it was purged. She once spoke of dark objects, powerful relics hidden away. Horcruxes, she called them." The word was like a bolt of lightning to Kaelen. Horcruxes. An ancient Sith ritual, to cleave one's soul, to achieve immortality. A monstrous act, even by Sith standards, but one he had studied in forgotten Sith holocrons. He had believed it was a power unique to his dimension. "Horcruxes," Kaelen repeated, his voice dangerously low, his forced disguise almost flickering at the surge of raw emotion. "Tell me everything, Silas. Every whisper, every rumor. What are these?" "Horcruxes." Silas, oblivious to the true depth of Kaelen's intensity, simply saw a chance to further ingratiate himself. "Well, they're incredibly dark. The darkest magic imaginable, they say. Split your soul to hide it in an object, make yourself immortal. Only truly evil wizards could ever attempt it." As Silas prattled on, sharing snippets of half-understood folklore and fearful rumors, Kaelen's mind raced. Voldemort was not merely a wizard of immense power. He was an adept of a twisted, forgotten dark art, similar in horrific principle to the Sith's own pursuit of immortality. This changed everything. Voldemort wasn't just a rival. He was a dark reflection, a twisted parallel. And if he had Horcruxes, his defeat would require more than just a duel. It would require a meticulous, strategic dismantling. The path to dominion, Kaelen realized, was becoming clearer, darker, and infinitely more intricate than he had first imagined. He had found Voldemort's secret, a vulnerability that transcended mere magical combat. The Dark Lord had built an empire of fear, but within that empire lay the seeds of its own destruction. A secret only Maul, the forgotten Sith Lord, was equipped to truly exploit. He would not just defeat Voldemort, he would dissect him, piece by agonizing piece. The true game had just begun. The chill of Malfoy Manor's dungeons had become familiar to Kaelen, a constant hum against the raw power that thrummed beneath his disguised skin. Days bled into weeks, each marked by escalating acts of terror and brutal displays of the Dark Lord's wrath. Kaelen, ever the silent observer, had participated in several minor raids, his methods swift, precise, and utterly devoid of mercy, earning him a reputation for unnerving competence among the more theatrical Death Eaters. His wandless magic, a terrifying burst of telekinetic force, a crushing mental grip, or an unsettling prescience that allowed him to anticipate enemy movements, left his peers awestruck and wary. Tonight, however, was different. The meeting was not in the dungeon, but in the grand drawing room, the usual opulence now suffocated by shadows and a tangible aura of malevolence. Voldemort himself stood before the ornate fireplace, his serpentine face etched with a rare blend of satisfaction and meticulous planning. Bellatrix Lestrange knelt at his feet, practically vibrating with fanaticism, while Lucius Malfoy hovered anxiously, his usual sneer replaced by a practiced subservience. Kaelen stood among the circle of Death Eaters, his gaze fixed on Voldemort, dissecting every twitch, every inflection in the rasping voice. The Ministry weakens, but it does not shatter, Voldemort hissed, his red eyes gleaming. Our enemies cling to their antiquated notions of order, their pathetic good. But there is a pocket of resistance, a particularly stubborn thorn in my side. A Muggle-born encampment, deep in the Welsh mountains, shielded by ancient protective wards and a few misguided blood traitors. Kaelen felt a ripple of anticipation. This was it. A target of strategic importance, not just a random act of terror. They funnel intelligence, they shelter the undesirables, and they dare to believe they can defy me, Voldemort continued, his voice rising in a cold crescendo. Bellatrix has begged for this assignment. But this mission requires a different touch. Bellatrix whimpered, her face contorted in disappointment. Kaelen subtly shifted his weight, allowing a flicker of controlled intensity to pass through his eyes. He didn't need to ask for it. He needed to project his suitability. Voldemort's gaze swept over the assembled Death Eaters, lingering on Kaelen. The camp is warded against direct assault, too remote for rapid reinforcement. It requires a precise, surgical strike. Someone who can bypass the outer defenses, dismantle the inner protections, and crush the spirit of resistance, not merely eradicate bodies. Someone efficient. Kaelen. The mention of his name was a cold claw tightening around Kaelen's gut. Not fear, but a spark of grim satisfaction. He took a measured step forward, acknowledging the command. You will infiltrate the camp alone, Voldemort stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Disarm their wards, capture their leader, a squib named Alara Thorne, apparently a distant cousin to our Silas here, and bring her to me. Alive. The rest, you may deal with as you see fit. Let it be a message that no sanctuary, no matter how remote, is beyond my reach. Kaelen nodded, a silent promise of obedience and absolute ruthlessness. His mind was already mapping the terrain, calculating probabilities, and devising strategies. This was precisely the kind of challenge he craved, an opportunity to push his limits and test the wizarding world's defenses against his alien power. Later that night, as Kaelen meticulously prepared for his mission, Silas Thorne, looking agitated, found him in a rarely used antechamber. "Kaelen, you truly have his lordship's favor," Silas blurted out, a mix of envy and awe in his voice. A solo mission of such importance. Astounding. But Alara Thorne? She's a slippery one. My family tried to disown her decades ago, but she found a way to use her unfortunate status to become a leader for those mudbloods. Kaelen turned from the small, intricate map he was studying, his eyes like chips of obsidian in the dim light. Her status is irrelevant. Her resistance is the only factor. Of course, Silas stammered, then leaned in conspiratorially. But be careful. That camp, it's rumored to be protected by some very old magic. Not just spells, but warding circles, ancient runes. My grandfather, before he died, used to speak of such things, meant to hide entire communities from the darkest of spells. Voldemort himself hasn't bothered with it, which is why he's sending you. Kaelen filed that information away. Ancient runes. Another system of power to understand, to potentially corrupt. He knew the Force could pierce many illusions, but dedicated magical wards might require a more nuanced approach. He'd have to observe and adapt. "Tell me more about this ancient magic," Kaelen prompted, his voice a low growl. He knew Silas enjoyed feeling important, sharing scraps of knowledge. Silas puffed out his chest slightly. "Well, it's not something taught at Hogwarts, you understand. More, family secrets. Bloodlines. Some say the really powerful pureblood families, before the Statute of Secrecy, had rituals that could grant gifts, not just spells. Immortality, even. Though, of course, that's just old wives' tales." He chuckled nervously. "His lordship is always searching for such secrets, I hear. Things to make him even more impervious. Immortality." The word resonated with Kaelen, a familiar siren song to the most ambitious Darksiders. He knew of Sith Lords who had prolonged their lives through esoteric rituals, through transferring their consciousness. Could this ancient magic be akin to what he had glimpsed in the fragmented lore of the Sith? He had heard whispers of Voldemort's unusual obsessions, his frantic search for powerful artifacts. This impervious concept struck a chord. Impervious to what? Kaelen asked, his gaze piercing. Silas shivered slightly. To death itself, some say. I heard a rumor once, from one of the older Death Eaters, that the Dark Lord had divided his soul. Used some truly vile magic to ensure he could never truly die. Split himself into pieces, stored in powerful objects. Horcruxes, they called them. But that's madness, Kaelen. A Dark Lord like ours wouldn't need such crutches. A shiver of genuine intrigue ran through Kaelen. Horcruxes. Divided soul. This was beyond anything even the Sith had truly perfected without immense personal cost. If Voldemort had achieved such a feat, it explained his casual disregard for his own mortality, his sheer arrogance. It also presented a monumental vulnerability. A fragmented soul meant fragmented power, a target for a true Sith Lord. Indeed, Kaelen murmured, his voice deceptively calm. Madness. But useful madness, perhaps. Any more old wives' tales you deem worthy of my time, Silas? Silas shook his head, looking slightly unnerved by Kaelen's intensity. No, that's all. Just be careful. Thorn is clever, and the wards are strong. They will not be strong enough, Kaelen promised, his voice a low, chilling rasp. The Welsh mountains were a jagged scar against the bruised purple sky. Kaelen apparat to a concealed ridge miles from the suspected camp, allowing himself to melt into the shadows of the ancient rock face. His enhanced senses reached out, probing the air, feeling for the familiar distortion of magic. Silas had been right. The wards were old, deep, like roots gripping the earth. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy, designed not for outright repulsion, but for concealment and gradual erosion of morale. He found the perimeter, not with a flash of light, but with a subtle drag on his force sense, a gentle resistance in the air that seemed to push against his very presence. He closed his eyes, extending his consciousness, searching for the flaws, the minute imperfections in the warding matrix. This was not a wall to be blasted through, but a complex puzzle to be unraveled. He found it, a hairline fracture in the magical weave, where a century of weathering had thinned the protections, a place where a small, unassuming stream flowed from under the mountain. It wasn't large enough for a person to pass through conventionally, but Kaelen didn't operate conventionally. He flowed like smoke, using a subtle force push to propel himself through the minuscule gap, bending his form with unnatural flexibility. He felt the warding magic brush against him, a cold, tingling sensation that threatened to disrupt his human illusion, but he held it firm, his will an iron cage around his true form. Inside, the camp was nestled in a hidden valley, a cluster of magically expanded tents and a few sturdy, reinforced cabins. Soft lights glowed, and the distant murmur of voices hinted at the illusion of safety. But Kaelen didn't sense safety. He sensed the anxiety of people living under a death sentence. He moved with the silent grace of a predator, his footsteps making no sound on the damp earth. His target was the largest cabin, undoubtedly the command center. He sensed multiple life forms within, their fears and hopes like faint flares in the gloom. A sudden flicker of movement behind him. A sentry. Kaelen didn't turn. He extended a hand, palm open, and a silent, invisible wave of force energy slammed into the sentry's chest, lifting him off his feet and propelling him into a nearby tree. There was no scream, just a soft thud as the body slumped to the ground, unconscious, perhaps even dead. Kaelen didn't care. He reached the cabin door. It was secured by a complex magical lock, several overlapping layers of wards. He didn't bother with a wand. He pressed his palm against the wood, and a surge of dark side energy, channeled directly from his core, erupted. It wasn't a spell, it was raw, focused power. The wood hissed, the magical lock shrieked in protest, then disintegrated, the door spluttering into dust. He stepped inside. The occupants were frozen, their faces pale in the lantern light. 3 wizards, 1 witch. One of them, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a defiant set to her jaw, had a wand half raised. Alara Thorn. Who are you? Thorn demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. Kaelen said nothing. He simply looked at her, his eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. He reached out with the force, not to choke, but to paralyze, to crush their will with the sheer weight of his presence. He wanted her terrified, but lucid. Thorn dropped her wand, a gasp tearing from her throat as an invisible vice gripped her. Her eyes widened in horror, not at a spell, but at the sheer, unbridled malice radiating from this stranger. The 3 wizards behind her collapsed, unconscious, their minds unable to withstand the assault. Kaelen stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Lord Voldemort requires your presence. He saw the flicker of comprehension in her eyes, the dawning horror of her inevitable fate. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Kaelen reached out, his hand closing around her arm, a grip of iron. As he prepared to apparate, his force senses flared. A subtle echo, a residual presence of powerful, ancient magic. Not hostile, but imprinted on the very fabric of the cabin. He touched the wooden table, sensing the lingering energy. It felt personal. A faint whisper of a long-gone consciousness of powerful secrets bound within the wood. Like a trace, an impression of something that had been. Horcruxes. The pieces of Voldemort's soul. A cold, calculating smile touched Kaelen's lips, unseen in the darkness. This camp was not merely a thorn in Voldemort's side. It was a ghost of a deeper, darker past, perhaps linked to the very magic that sustained his enemy. This Alara Thorn was a key, but perhaps not just for Voldemort's interrogation. She might hold a thread to the Dark Lord's deepest secret. Kaelen vanished, taking Thorn with him, leaving behind a silent, ruined cabin and the chilling realization that Voldemort's dominion, while vast, was built upon foundations far more intricate and vulnerable than anyone suspected. The game had just begun. The air in Malfoy Manor was a stagnant broth of fear and ambition, and Kaelen, perched on its edges, found it a surprisingly fertile ground. Lord Voldemort, for all his terrifying power, ruled through an iron fist of paranoia, fostering an environment where every Death Eater watched every other with suspicion. This, Kaelen realized, was not strength, but a glaring vulnerability. Fear-inspired loyalty, yes, but also betrayal. True dominion, he knew, was built not just on terror, but on a more insidious control, the manipulation of desire, the whisper of a better path. Voldemort's pronouncements often left a trail of anxious murmurs. "The Ministry is failing us," he'd hiss, referring to the slow progress and outright conquest, despite their deep infiltration. "Potter still eludes our grasp. Our reach must extend further, faster." These words, meant to galvanize, instead created a chasm of blame and self-preservation among his followers. Lucius Malfoy would subtly deflect, blaming Carrows or Yaxley for tactical missteps. Bellatrix Lestrange would shriek about the purity of intention, offering increasingly sadistic and often impractical solutions. Kaelen observed. He rarely spoke unless directly addressed, and when he did, his suggestions were stark, brutal, and, crucially, effective. When a supply route for banned magical components was repeatedly intercepted by the Order, Voldemort had initially tasked Dolohov. Weeks passed, failures mounted, and Dolohov's excuses grew thin. "Kaelen," Voldemort's cold voice had cut through a particularly tense meeting. "What is your counsel on this matter?" Kaelen had met the crimson eyes without flinching. "The problem is not the route, my lord, but the predictability of those who guard it. And the loyalty of those who transport the goods. Dolohov seeks to fortify a broken structure. I would shatter it entirely, then rebuild it with new bones." His proposal was simple: publicly execute a dozen minor, known sympathizers in the territories where the route was compromised, regardless of their direct involvement. Then, offer a substantial, fear-driven reward for any information leading to the Order operatives. The ruthlessness was typical Death Eater fare, but the strategy behind it was cold, precise, and aimed at complete psychological domination of a region. It wasn't about catching the culprits, but about making everyone too terrified to even think of assisting them. Voldemort, after a moment of chilling contemplation, had given a slight nod. "See to it." Kaelen had, of course, seen to it with terrifying efficiency. The executions were public, bloody, and meticulously documented. Within a week, the Order's network in that region collapsed, deluged by panicked denunciations. The supply route was re-established, operating without a single hitch. Dolohov, humiliated, now avoided Kaelen's gaze. This wasn't merely about success. It was about demonstrating a superior form of control. Kaelen's methods resonated with the darkest impulses of the Death Eaters, but they also showed a strategic depth that Voldemort's current lieutenants often lacked, blinded by their own prejudices and infighting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, when a difficult task arose, the whispers began to shift from "ask Bellatrix" or "Lucius should handle it" to "perhaps Kaelen could ensure it." He exploited these cracks. He'd subtly highlight Lucius's preference for political maneuvering over direct confrontation in certain situations, making him seem hesitant. He'd commend Bellatrix's ferocity, but gently imply her lack of subtlety often left too many loose ends, allowing her to spiral into even greater fits of rage that Voldemort found tiresome. He offered solutions that were more expedient, more brutal, more final than what others proposed, always attributing the vision to Voldemort, while ensuring the execution cemented Kaelen's reputation. Silas Thorne was Kaelen's shadow, his ears, and his unwitting instrument. The ambitious Death Eater, still reveling in his perceived rise under Kaelen's patronage, eagerly brought him gossip and insights. "The Dark Lord is displeased with Yaxley," Silas murmured one evening in a deserted corridor of Malfoy Manor, his eyes darting nervously around. "His infiltration of the Ministry is proving less complete than expected. The whispers are that Scrimgeour is still resisting more vigorously than anticipated, despite the imperious curses." Kaelen listened, his mind processing. Imperious. A crude tool. Force persuasion was far more potent, leaving no trace, no internal struggle. He filed the information away. "And not," Silas continued, emboldened by Kaelen's silence. "He claims to have found a lead on a hidden Order stronghold in Wiltshire. But he is cautious. He fears a trap." Kaelen felt a flicker of disdain. Fear. Always fear. He could feel Silas's own apprehension emanating from him, a frantic heartbeat beneath the polished robes. It was time to tighten the leash. Later that night, Kaelen summoned Silas to an abandoned section of the manor's extensive grounds, a dilapidated greenhouse, its glass panes shattered, overgrown with thorny vines. The moon cast eerie shadows, and the wind moaned through the broken structures. Silas arrived, breathless, attempting to project confidence. Kaelen, you wish to speak with me? Kaelen turned from the skeletal remains of a rare, magical plant. His face, under the moonlight, seemed sharper, more angular than usual. His eyes, normally a piercing gray, held an unsettling depth. Silas, Kaelen's voice was a low hum, stripped of its usual subtle inflections, resonating with a power that vibrated through Silas's bones. You have served me, adequately. You have brought me information, and you have executed my commands without question. Silas preened, a foolish smile touching his lips. I live to serve, Kaelen. I understand the importance of your particular talents. We are destined for greatness, you and I, under the Dark Lord's glorious reign. Kaelen took a slow step closer, and Silas instinctively recoiled, a primal shiver tracing its way down his spine. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure. The temperature dropped several degrees. The Dark Lord's reign, Kaelen echoed, the words laced with a contempt that made Silas's blood run cold. A reign built on fear, on crude magic, on the broken hopes of fearful men. Silas stammered, his face paling. Kaelen, what are you saying? You pledged allegiance to the Dark Lord. Allegiance is a malleable thing, Silas. Like loyalty. Like fear. Kaelen's gaze fixed on him, piercing, stripping away his composure. Silas felt exposed, his thoughts laid bare. He saw a flicker, a momentary distortion in Kaelen's features, a flash of crimson eyes, a hint of something horned beneath the skin, a momentary broadening of his cheekbones that was utterly alien. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the image seared itself into Silas's mind. You believe in power, Silas. True power. Kaelen raised a hand, not a wand in sight. A broken glass pane, lying embedded in the earth nearby, shuddered. Then, with a silent, invisible command, it lifted, hovered for a moment, and then exploded inwards, shattering into 1,000 crystalline shards that hung suspended in the air, glinting like frozen stars. Silas whimpered, falling back a step, transfixed. He had never seen wandless magic of such raw, silent potency. No incantation, no focused intent beyond the sheer, terrifying will of the man before him. The magic you know, Kaelen continued, his voice softer now, yet infinitely more dangerous, is a child's parlor trick compared to what I wield. Your Dark Lord, for all his bluster, relies on ritual, on ancient blood, on the feeble constructs of language and incantation. He gestured, and the suspended shards of glass whirled into a miniature, razor-sharp cyclone. My power comes from within. From a source far older, far deeper, than any of your ancient magics. He stepped forward again, and the cyclone of glass shards followed, swirling around Silas's head, inches from his face, a chilling testament to Kaelen's absolute control. Silas could feel the miniature drafts of air as they danced, feel the cold threat of each sharp edge. You will serve me, Silas, Kaelen stated, the declaration a flat, unyielding fact. Not as an ally, not as a confederate. As an instrument. You will be my eyes, my ears, my voice when I need one. You will do my bidding without question, without hesitation, without a flicker of independent thought. And you will ensure that the threads of discontent and ambition that already exist among the Death Eaters are carefully woven into a tapestry that serves my design. Silas, tears streaming down his face, could only nod, a pathetic, broken sound escaping his throat. The mask had completely fallen. This was not a man. This was a demon, a creature of pure, unfathomable will. The raw, terrifying presence Kaelen exuded was beyond anything he had ever encountered, even from Voldemort himself. The Dark Lord inspired fear and commanded loyalty through shared ideology and power displays. Kaelen inspired utter, existential terror and promised oblivion for disobedience. Kaelen watched him, a slow, predatory smile twisting his lips. His eyes briefly flashed crimson again, and this time, Silas saw the faint, dark lines that momentarily appeared on his face, lines that suggested something inhuman, something reptilian or demonic. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the Kaelen he knew was an illusion, a disguise. And the true being beneath was a nightmare. Good, Kaelen purred, the cyclone of glass shards dissolving as swiftly and silently as it had formed. Now, tell me everything you know about this, Not's lead on the Order stronghold. And then, we will discuss how to exploit it, not for the Dark Lord's glory, but for a greater purpose. A purpose that will shake this dimension to its core. The air thinned, the oppressive presence fading, leaving Silas gasping, trembling. He looked at Kaelen, his mind a whirlwind of terror and dawning, awful understanding. He was no longer a Death Eater. He was Kaelen's slave, bound by a fear far deeper than any imperious curse, a fear that gnawed at his very soul. And Kaelen, the silent predator, was ready to strike. The serpent had found its fangs. Voldemort would never see him coming. The air in Malfoy Manor hung heavy, a thick shroud of oppressive magic and unspoken fear. Tonight, even the grand drawing room, usually a stage for Voldemort's terrifying pronouncements, felt like a mausoleum. Nagini, sensing the unusual tension, coiled restlessly at the base of the Dark Lord's ornate chair, her scales shimmering an oily black in the dim light. Voldemort sat motionless, his red eyes fixed on the empty space before him. His mental probes had found nothing, but his paranoia screamed. The whispers, the shifting loyalties, the strange confidence of those he believed he had broken, it all pointed to one source. Kaelen. Kaelen, Voldemort's voice hissed, a dry rustle of parchment and venom. It was not a question, but a command. The tall figure stepped forward from the shadows, his expression unreadable as always. Maul, in his human guise, felt the familiar hum of the force within him, a predatory thrumming anticipating the hunt. He had woven his web carefully, and tonight, the spider would emerge. "My lord," Maul replied, his voice a low, even cadence that grated on Voldemort's nerves. There was no subservience in it, merely acknowledgement. Voldemort leaned forward, his serpentine face contorting into a sneer. "You have grown bold, Kaelen. Too bold. My servants whisper of your unique methods. Your successes are noted, yes, but your ascendancy is not." His eyes narrowed, burning holes into Maul's facade. "Tell me, Kaelen, what are you?" Maul allowed a slow, dangerous smile to stretch across his lips, a gesture that sent a jolt of unease through Voldemort. "I am many things, Lord Voldemort. A survivor. An architect. A bringer of true order." He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a death knell. "And tonight, I am your successor." The illusion of Kaelen flickered then, the human features wavering, revealing a glimpse of yellow-red eyes, of a horned brow, of skin the color of dried blood. It was subtle, barely a ripple in the fabric of his disguise, but potent enough to send a cold spike of something akin to fear through Voldemort. This was no mere wizard. Voldemort rose, his wand snapping into his hand. "You dare," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You dare mock Lord Voldemort in his own house? You are an insolent cur, an anomaly. I shall scour your very existence from this dimension." An anomaly, perhaps, Maul conceded, the flickering of his true form becoming more pronounced. "But an anomaly capable of what you cannot comprehend. Your power, Dark Lord, is primitive. A parlor trick compared to the true might of the dark side." With a scream of pure rage, Voldemort launched his first curse. Avada Kedavra. The jet of brilliant green light tore across the room, fast and deadly. But Maul didn't flinch. He didn't raise a wand, for he had none. Instead, with a guttural roar that was less human than beast, he unleashed the force. A wave of invisible energy erupted from his hands, not blocking the curse, but deflecting it. The killing curse, with a sound like tearing fabric, veered violently, scarring the ancient stone wall behind where Maul had stood a moment ago. Voldemort's eyes widened in disbelief. No wizard could simply deflect the killing curse. But before he could process the impossible, Maul was already in motion. He moved with a speed that defied human perception, a blur of dark robes. His raw force abilities, honed through years of exile and rage, manifested as a terrifying blend of wandless magic and pure kinetic power. He met Voldemort's next barrage of curses, a flurry of crucios and sectum sempras, not with counterspells, but with a horrifying display of physical prowess. He ducked, weaved, and once, with a powerful force push, sent a silver candelabra hurtling into the path of a bone-shattering curse. The manor's ancient fixtures exploded into shrapnel. "You rely on your stick, wizard," Maul snarled, his voice now layered with a growl that was unmistakably alien. The illusion of Kaelen was shredding, his true Zobrick features now clearly visible, the red and black tattoos, the crown of short, sharp horns emerging from his brow. His eyes, now fully Sith yellow, burned with malevolent power. "I rely on power." Voldemort, momentarily thrown by the sheer impossibility of his opponent, recovered with a furious surge of his own dark magic. He spun, his wand a blur, conjuring a dozen spectral serpents that lunged at Maul. Maul met them with a horrifyingly elegant display of his own. He ignited the air around his hands, not with flame, but with crackling energy, a visual manifestation of force lightning that twisted the spectral serpents into ash before they could reach him. He then grabbed a heavy, antique armchair with the force, not throwing it, but compressing it into a crushing ball of wood and velvet, launching it at Voldemort with incredible velocity. Voldemort shrieked, barely operating away in time as the projectile slammed into the wall, leaving a deep crater. "Impossible," he hissed, his face contorted in a mix of fury and dawning fear. He was facing something utterly alien, something that defied every law of magic he knew. Maul stalked him, a silent predator. He was learning, adapting. Voldemort's magic was potent, but it required intent, incantation, and often a moment to gather. Maul's force was immediate, an extension of his will. He observed Voldemort's movements, his tells, the briefest flicker of magical energy before a spell was cast. "You fear death, Dark Lord," Maul taunted, his words like barbs. "You cling to life through abominations, fragments of a soul shattered by your own cowardice." A true Sith embraces death, knowing it is merely a transition to greater power. Voldemort's eyes darted around the room, seeking an advantage, a weakness. The servants, if any were present, would have fled in terror. This was a duel beyond anything the wizarding world had ever witnessed. "Your power is wild, uncontrolled," Voldemort screamed, unleashing a torrent of dark, complex curses. "Untamed. It will consume you," Maul responded with a calculated ferocity. He absorbed a particularly nasty blasting curse with a force shield, the energy rippling outwards like heat haze. Then, with a flicker of precognition, he anticipated Voldemort's next move, a forbidden curse aimed at his heart. He didn't dodge. Instead, he extended his left hand and, with a grunt of effort, ripped the wand from Voldemort's grasp. The Elder Wand flew through the air, spinning end over end. Voldemort stared, aghast. He was wandless, for the first time in decades. Pathetic, Maul spat, catching the Elder Wand effortlessly in his right hand. He ran his thumb along its ancient, gnarled surface, sensing its power, its history, its thirst. He tossed it aside with disdain. A crutch. A toy. Voldemort, reeling from the loss of his most prized possession, let out a wordless roar and began to gather ambient magic, his body crackling with dark energy. He was preparing a raw, wandless assault, a desperate surge of pure, uncontrolled power, the kind that could level an entire building. His eyes glowed like embers, his serpentine face twisted into a mask of ultimate hatred. Maul smiled, a truly terrifying expression that promised an eternity of suffering. This was it. The moment of truth. He had learned from Voldemort's arrogance, his reliance on fear, his lack of true strategic depth beyond brute force. He had observed his strengths and, more importantly, his vulnerabilities. As Voldemort reached the peak of his power, a shimmering black aura enveloping him, Maul moved. He didn't rush. He calculated. He saw the raw magic coalesce, the immense pressure building. And he knew exactly where the weak point lay, in the unstable, untamed nature of Voldemort's magic, fueled by rage, not discipline. Maul extended both hands, not in a simple push, but a complex, multi-layered force attack he had been perfecting. He unleashed a torrent of pure, concentrated dark side energy, focused not on Voldemort's body, but on the coalescing magical construct around him. It was a precise, surgical strike into the heart of Voldemort's power, designed to disrupt, to unravel, to shatter. The air shrieked as the two immense forces collided. Voldemort's black aura exploded inwards, not outwards, tearing at him. A high-pitched scream tore from the Dark Lord's throat, a sound of agony and disbelief. He writhed, his skin blistering, his body convulsing as his own uncontrolled magic turned against him. Maul had exploited the very core of Voldemort's power, turning it into a destructive feedback loop. Voldemort crashed to the ground, no longer shimmering with dark energy, but broken, defeated, his body smoking faintly. He lay motionless for a long moment, before a faint gasp escaped his lips. His eyes, though still red, were clouded with terror and profound confusion. He was alive, but utterly vanquished, a broken puppet whose strings had been cut. Maul walked towards him, his true Zobric form now fully visible, horns sharp, tattoos stark, yellow eyes glowing with triumph. He stood over the Dark Lord, a monument to a power Voldemort could never have imagined. "You spoke of dominion, Lord Voldemort," Maul rumbled, his voice echoing in the ravaged room. "But you understood only fear. You built an empire on sand, fragile and fleeting. I will build one on rock, on absolute power, absolute will, and an understanding of the shadows you only ever glimpsed." He reached out a hand, not to harm, but to probe. He felt the fragments of Voldemort's soul, clinging desperately to life. He felt the echoes of ancient magic, the secrets of immortality. He would not destroy them. He would master them. He would assimilate them. Maul turned his gaze to the ruined room, to the shattered windows and the scorch marks. His arrival had shattered the delicate balance of this dimension. His reign had begun. But he knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the first step. The true challenges, a prophesied boy, a ministry in chaos, and the lingering threat of shattered souls, awaited him. His work was far from over. His ascendancy had just begun.